Thank you, guys. This is I think our third panel. So we're really excited about this today. But before we jump in, why don't we start off with Lisa, how you founded the company and what got you started with Hyperwallet as well as FI.SPAN. Did I call it FI.SPAN, by the way?
Yeah, as long as you don't call it FI.SPAN, it's all good. So I was a working engineer in the late 90s, running the payment acceptance for an online gambling company. And like many people at that time, saw the opportunity to bring non-card payment services onto the internet. So it was a classic founder start over a bottle of Chardonnay in the year 1999, because people were partying like it was 1999. So started Hyperwallet with a mission to bring low-cost, anonymous credit push transactions to the internet. So that's the story of founding it. Ran it for 15 years through acquisition, which the purpose of today is to tell war stories about, the good, bad, and the ugly of actually going through some exits. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But stepped aside from that business from an operating role in May of 2015, and a year later started my next company, FI.SPAN, that I'm in now, which is, again, another fintech, a little bit different, positioned at helping banks integrate with accounting and ERP applications for their business customers.
And how about yourself, Dennis? What got you started with Buddy Build? Sorry, I was about to call it Hyperwallet.
No worries. So Buddy Build was a consequence of basically our personal experience, not too dissimilar. I've been working at Amazon, actually with Jerome, who's in the audience, and we had been building a technology on the Android platform, and it was for the Kindle-based devices. Through that, it was effectively a mobile application on Android. I had started building iOS apps when the iOS SDK first came out, and I thought, let's see what that's like. We have these monolithic, crappy systems at Amazon. I'm sure the quote-unquote real world is much better. And so a couple of friends and I started building this app and wanted to unlock this workflow that Amazon had these infrastructure and this tool to accommodate. And when we looked at what the real world actually did, we actually thought we were doing it wrong. And so we went and chatted with a whole bunch of folks and said, well, how do you solve this problem? And realized that it was just fundamentally broken. And so instead of building that app, we built the platform that helps thousands of teams build those apps.
So creating the workflow for the problem that you had seen.
Yeah, well, the workflow kind of existed for development teams already, but the kind of tools and kind of cloud platform that they needed for it.
Yeah, the tools in terms of a workflow. Okay.
Yeah, totally.
What were the goals for the company early on for both of you? I think they're a little bit different because they service different industries.
Yeah, so, again, dating myself, but in the year 2000, we actually thought we would be billionaires within sort of 3 years. It was such a fabulous idea. So the idea of bringing anonymous, very low-cost transactions onto the internet. So the goal for the business was to become an alternative digital currency for the internet and become billionaires. And beyond that, we hadn't really thought things through.
So billionaires.
Yeah, but at the time, a couple million sounded
couple
pretty
millions.
good to
You'd
start.
been satisfied with that. I like the ambition there. What was the ambition for Buddy Build?
Honestly, it was we just thought this is a problem that needed to be solved. I think that people who build things in some capacity want to be appreciated for the work that they do. And so anyone who says they build something purely selflessly and there isn't like an ego aspect of it in some capacity, I think is probably not necessarily in tune with exactly the motivation. For us, we just thought this is a problem that needed to be solved. I remember sitting in a coffee shop on Water Street, ironically with an ex-Apple engineer, and him specifically saying, like, there's no way that you'll be able to do this. And now I guess the expression would be like, hold my beer, because I was like, we're going to go do that. So we didn't really have any like aspirations for kind of any financial outcome or anything like that. We just we thought this should exist in the world, and there's a group of people that like loved working together. And so we're like, yeah, let's go do that.
So both of you kind of had different goals in place, but similar at the same time. From the beginning, was there an exit strategy in place? Do you want to start, Dennis, or?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually funny. So we raised 2 rounds of financing, a Series A, or sorry, Seed Series and Series A from Valley-based investors. And they actually asked that question as well repeatedly. And to me, we never had any aspirations to sell it. It was just like, it was one of the things where, having worked in big companies, I really valued kind of the autonomy and freedom and the ability to kind of like execute at a fairly rapid rate and make a lot of the decisions or what have you. So having someone buy us would have to be a pretty compelling offer, and not financially, but it'd have to be something that you could only do together. So I was just like, I couldn't imagine that when we started.
How about yourself, Lisa?
Yeah, so our story is what I think is actually interesting about the panel is the really distinct and really different trajectories and stories about the ultimate, liquidity events that happened to the company. So the short answer is no, absolutely, we didn't have a viable liquidity plan in place when we started the business. And we also were unsuccessful in securing necessary capital. So we, as a business, really struggled, and it was, a classic 14-year overnight success story in Vancouver. So it was 14 years before my first exit. And the time that we even started thinking about liquidity events were more like 7 and 8 years into the business, because by that point, I knew, and people in the company knew that it was a real company, it had value, but we were bootstrapped, so bootstrapped in angel finance. So you have a different sort of, mentality within your business, different sense of board structure, of investor expectations. But the short story is around 2007, 2008. I had one acquirer in mind, and that was, whenever I was asked, I was like, Visa should buy us, Visa should buy us, Visa should buy us. And, went down, and by this point we were not a massive company, but at least substantive, and could get meetings with those sorts of folks. And I was shocked when Visa didn't want to buy us. At that point, we just put our heads down and just started building the business. So not to be trite or anything, but it wasn't something that was first of mind or even third of mind, as you're going through your work. It would come up probably twice a year at board meetings. Like, what's the liquidity strategy? And the answer always was, well, we're sitting here at revenues, customers, product capability. In about 12 to 18 months, we should be able to have a rational discussion about this. Really long-winded answer, but certainly my business wasn't built to sell, and it really wasn't built with a certain outcome in mind other than the product and service. Take it for what it was, but there wasn't a cognitive plan in place, and that's something that's different about my the second business.
And what's different about the second one is there is an exit strategy in place, correct?
There absolutely is an exit strategy in place, and again, not built to sell, but built to build in optionality on liquidity options, right? Certainly as I go about building this business, I am cognitive of keeping, does this decision and this product decision, does it increase or decrease optionality? And when I speak to optionality, and certainly for some of the companies that I know are in the room, I think of a financial buyer of your business. Private equity is a fantastic outcome for a lot of companies that are in the, even down to $5 million of revenue, $5, $10, $15 million of revenue. It doesn't need to be a strategic buyer that, makes the press for it to be a great outcome for a lot of people. So when I'm thinking about my business now, I try and think about, is this going to be something that's going to build us to be attractive to a financial buyer as well as possible strategics.
And you don't hear those stories as much as you do when it's a strategic acquisition as opposed to like a private equity acquisition. So it's really interesting that that's your path forward. Sorry, I'm just kind of saying what I'm thinking. But what made you decide in both of your previous companies that acquisition was the right path forward?
His answer will be more interesting, so I'll go first.
But it's so interesting because, you said you were 14 years old.
Yeah, so I was 14 years old, and I literally had shareholders on my cap table who died. So I had liquidity pressure from shareholders. I myself wanted liquidity. So that's the honest answer.
Okay. And how about yourself?
Sorry.
And you had made the exit at less than 3 years, right?
3 years, yeah.
Yeah. So
And so why?
what made you decide that it was the right path forward?
It's not obvious that it was. No, just kidding. So there's when you think about an acquisition, I think it comes back to like these first principles around like, well, why would you do that? And so I thought actually pretty long and hard around like a kind of a long set of non-negotiable topics. As an example, the Buddy Build team actually still works in the same office. We're all based in Vancouver. None of us were required or will be asked to move to Cupertino or California. So I care a lot about the Vancouver and Canadian tech ecosystem, and so I wasn't willing to negotiate on a topic like that. So there's a whole handful of those things. I kind of presented them and said, look, if you could come to terms on all of those, and the terms are non-negotiable, then we could consider it. So there's kind of like this preamble, and I think you have to be very principled around like what are those things that really, really matter to you that are outside, potentially the financial aspects of it or things of that nature. So that was the first process, the first step, and then the second one was really meeting the people and getting a sense for the people that you're going to work with. So early in my career, I remember sitting at Microsoft at a new employee orientation, and this executive vice president who ended up, building Xbox and a bunch of like really compelling products. Said the most important thing you can do is work with people that you like and that you respect. And so that's kind of served me well. All the employees that we hired are better than me in many ways. And so we looked for that in the same thing. So we had a couple of companies who wanted to buy us through the time, and they just weren't compelling in terms of the learning opportunities or what have you. And so, very principled around what your non-negotiable things are these people that you want to spend and kind of go through the trenches with. And then you think about like, where are you at right now? Where can you get to? And what's the probability of that happening? So you think about, competitive pressures or your own mental health and well-being and ability to like sustain it, what it could mean for people's lives. So there's a bunch of like factors that kind of go into it.
And you mentioned kind of the non-negotiables of being like people and that sort of thing. And you ultimately ended up with Apple. Were there any bad offers that you can speak of course, and what made them bad? And you kind of alluded to the things previously in your previous answer, but how about yourself, Lisa? Was there any offers that you received before PayPal, and what made those offers
just to be
unpalatable?
Clear, so Hyperwallet had two exits. The first exit was a private equity recap in 2014. So I took the business through that transaction. And for those that don't know, what that really did is everybody in the company sold half their holdings. So it took half off the table. And then a private equity company was the majority owner from 2015 through the recent sale, the sale last year to PayPal. So I've seen effectively two exits of the same company. What was your question?
Were there any bad offers before the PE?
Oh, yeah. There was some shockers.
And what made them bad?
So we didn't run a process ourselves. So again, unlike Buddy Build, we wanted to sell. We had, as I said, liquidity pressure, tired, the whole bit. we had an offer from a strategic, a large, well-known brand in payments. And the offer was like really predatory and one-sided, and it blew up really quickly. Quite frankly, we didn't get past like day one of being excited to even get a term sheet. And that died quickly. The second one, again, preemptive, inbound offer for the business, this time was from private equity. And what made the offer bad was, I don't know how detailed you want to get, but into sort of capital structure and being, really subordinated to the ultimate owner. So it was, it was just a bad structure, a bad deal for the shareholders. And so what changed after those two bad offers happened, I'm going to say 2011, 2012. And meanwhile, we're continuing to build the business and do what you do on a daily basis. So what changed finally to have the really good outcome, and so what you hear about in the press is, PayPal buys Hyperwallet for a big number. Nobody really heard about the private equity transaction, which was the game changer for the business. It put a relatively modest amount of capital on the balance sheet. But as I said, took that liquidity pressure off of us. And so in that transaction, that exit, we ran the process. So we hired a banker, we prepared a book, we went out and interviewed or whatever, ran a process that involved both strategic bidders and private equity bidders. And so that's kind of my main message, and nobody hears about that and nobody is sort of lauding that, but that was the transaction that made the biggest change in my business. So if you can control the process to the extent that you can when you are ready, it tends to lead to better outcomes.
And it sounds like you did the same. You controlled a bit of the process of your non-negotiables. I had a follow-up question to that. With the PE I don't know if we would call it an acquisition. Was it an acquisition?
Sure, because what PEs do, they own 51%.
Okay.
That's how that works.
How early on was that prior to being sold off to PayPal? What's the time frame?
So that was done in May of 2014, and the PayPal deal was announced almost exactly 4 years later.
Yeah, and it wasn't a small chunk of change. It was $400 million, which you should be very proud of because it's one of the biggest exits.
Like I say, everybody hears about that.
Of course.
But the much smaller transaction
made such a bigger.
It made a difference, right? We were able to execute.
Sorry, I'm just going through my questions. And you had mentioned you had liquidity pressures, and being 3 years old, were you facing some of the same challenges, or was that something that you didn't hear from your 2 rounds of investments?
No, the investors, the value-based investors, people, it's surprising how frequently people think they're actually quote-unquote bad guys or will pressure you to do things. Or I had an incredibly supportive group of people that I worked with. On the margin, they were they didn't want us to sell. They saw the metrics that the company had been experiencing, and they're this is a really, really good start. Don't sell it. But ultimately do what you think is best. And so they had an opinion, but they didn't force it down your throat, which is helpful.
Now, this is a really interesting question. Some advisors say that companies are bought, not sold. Do you agree? And if so, what does that mean to you? If not, why not? This is an Alex question.
So that's an MBA question.
Yeah, I was this is a Wharton School of Business question.
Right. I do agree with it, actually,
yeah.
that companies are bought, not sold. And there's a school of thought that you can start a business designed to sell from day one. I personally don't have that experience, and I personally couldn't do that. You start a business because you actually think you're solving a real problem and providing value in people's lives. So I do agree that businesses are bought, not sold. But there's a caveat, which is when you're running the business and building the business, and especially as soon as you take external capital, you do have a responsibility to think about the liquidity plan and challenge yourself if what you are doing is building enterprise value, and enterprise value by definition has an element of sellability to it.
Yeah, the way we thought about it, I had to convince people who were getting, job offers from, places like Amazon or Microsoft or what have you, and I'd say, oh, look, your salary there is going to be, let's say your total compensation is going to be $200,000. You can come work for us and we're going to pay you $90,000 or $85,000 or $65,000. And I was like, and then we're also going to give you some equity in the company, and that equity you should consider as lottery tickets. And statistically speaking, those things are worth nothing. So take a huge pay cut, get some useless paper, but it's going to be a really cool project. Hopefully you'll work with some really good people and have a fun time doing it. You'll work hard, but hopefully have a good time and fun doing it. So we never had that, we never had that kind of as an expected outcome. It is a pretty unique opportunity as someone who starts a company to then say those lottery tickets are now worth something to you. Mm-hmm. And for many people that it's like, a life-changing amount of money for them. Mm-hmm.
By the way, that was my most fun thing as well. So the first transaction, I had individual checks written to every single person, and we had a party, and I made every single person, no matter how small their check was. Because, you've slogged away for so long, to have that worthless lottery ticket be worth something is probably the most meaningful thing for the founder. Sorry.
Yeah, totally. I agree. That's it's definitely an incredibly unique feeling to say, thanks for taking the bet. And people react in surprisingly different ways. Yeah.
It's like those Lotto 649 kind of moments. Either they're super, never mind. And I was thinking of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory at the same time. Remember the golden ticket? Good old, what was it, Viola? Remember the one who ate the gum? Okay, sorry. Deal with me. I'm not stoned right now.
I want her on my team at pub night trivia. I feel like she'd be really good.
That's what I'm really good at, is trivia. Back on track. So kind of speaking of stakeholders, how do you make sure all your stakeholders, you talked a little bit about your employees, but all of them are taken care of? Because it's such a complicated time, right? You have to be quiet about things, but also kind of pull them into the loop at the right time. How do you ensure that everyone's, and it's hard to do, of course, and I'm sure that some people's needs aren't taken care of, but do best by your people. How do you ensure that?
So I think stakeholders, both of obviously the investors, the employees, and our customers. So the investors, I'm like, you're going to get an X return on your dollars. They're like, sounds great, awesome. Employees, I guess we shared that same set of principles. And so what we did is we actually, at a certain point, we got through a whole bunch of these kind of terms. We actually spent, the two teams spent 2 days together. And then at the end of those 2 days, I brought everyone in the same room, and I said, here's what the opportunity is, but actually withheld the acquisition price. So no one knew what it meant to them. And then I said, on the count of 3, we're going to do thumbs up or thumbs down. And if a single person in the company did thumbs down, we wouldn't do it. And so we went 1, 2, 3, and everyone put their thumbs up. And so I was like, all right, I guess we have to move forward in that path. So that's how we did it. I said, here are the pros and cons and what you should expect or what have you. And then they voted. And then the third was the customers. And so if you were, it's very typical when a company gets acquired that the acquirer takes those customers and shuts them down or moves them to a different service or so on and so forth. We have a bunch of customers in Vancouver who took a bet on us very early on, were kind enough to spend time with us and tell us what they wanted. And so we made it clear that that was one of the non-negotiables. So from a stakeholder perspective, I felt a personal accountability to those customers. And so if you're a paying customer at Buddy Build, when the deal closed, you still have access to the service. That was one of the things that we cared a lot about.
I think that's so principled because I haven't been myself, truth be told, I've never been with a company that's been acquired. I've left companies that eventually were acquired, and I heard a lot of horror stories from those customers about what happened when the acquisition took place. And so to hear that, that's very forward thinking of you, I think, personally.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I just thought about who are all the people who are quote unquote invested in our success. So it's people who give you money, people who give you their time, or people who give you their energy, right? So,
yeah. Absolutely. How about yourself, Lisa?
So in financial services, and the truth is that when Hyperwallet was acquired, we had a pretty big book of business in something called direct selling, and that had been overlooked by mainstream financial institutions. And that's why we were able to get into that sector. And after the PE company took us, part of growing the valuation of the business over the next few years was to diversify into these modern, sexy marketplaces, think Uber and Airbnb. And we did that, and when we went through the second transaction, I was still on the board through that period. It was interesting to see the bidders and some of the plans for the business. I never had a worry about employees being not well looked after or not having opportunities because, this was an asset that was being bought for not just the technology and revenue and capabilities, but primarily for the people, quite honestly. But I had a very big concern for my customers. And some of the bidders in my process absolutely would have turned off my customers on day 2. And even though I wasn't in the business for the last 3 years, just like you, they had given me my break. And some of them had gone to make it perfectly clear that the reason you got my business was Citibank treated me poorly and turned me off, right? And I was sitting here, and quite frankly, at that point, I had limited ability to drive a truck. Like, I wasn't in a position to set non-negotiable terms anymore. I'm a minority in the own business, right? So I was thankful that it worked out and it went to a company that would keep my business, keep my customers.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that how you build a company is, of course, your employees and the technology, but your customers. And
yeah, but just to be perfectly clear, if the transaction had have gone, to a different bidder, it's not like I wouldn't have supported it.
Yeah.
Like, that's the honest truth.
And that's fair enough, yeah. It's just interesting to see that there's that parallel there. Sorry, so much, okay, so this is completely, we're diverting topics, but so much is focused on price. What else matters? And I think we've kind of talked about that. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, aside from values, value alignment, the liquidity, the company that you're going to, taking care of your employees, anything else that matters in the acquisition process? And we can skip it if not.
I don't think anything that, beyond what we said, I would say, it's one of the things I wish I knew when I was making the decision is the impact it would have on you afterwards.
Yeah.
And so if you put your blood, sweat, and tears into something, I don't have any kids, but it's the closest thing I've ever had to a kid. It keeps me up in the middle of the night. I obsess over it. I was like, I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, oh, is everything okay? Just random stuff. But it becomes, when it's no longer yours, or when that phase of your life is over, it's actually, you kind of go through a mourning process. And so I don't think, I had talked to other friends who kind of sold their companies, and I don't know that that's really well understood, kind of the impact that it can have on you, because it does, for me, it became kind of my identity in many ways. That's all I would think about all the time. Yeah. And so that's something that, I would, as people kind of go through that process, know that there will be a trough of disillusionment at the other end of it, for sure.
The highs and lows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that too myself, of when you kind of sell something, or there's an acquisition of that sense of loss and that lack of control that tends to take over for founders. Did you find support locally through that, kind of talking to other founders that have gone through a similar path? And
yeah.
Is there that type of support? Is that something we need to work on in Vancouver? Sorry, off topic, but out of curiosity.
Well, my experience was different. And again, I think it's given the tenure, right? So a company with, so much success so early, growing so quickly, you made a decision to exit for all those fantastic reasons. Your experience is going to be different from someone like me. So when I walked away after 15 years, I felt great.
It's the kids were moving out.
Yeah, this was an ugly, pimply teenager.
Yeah.
This wasn't a bouncing baby anymore.
But in Vancouver, we never leave. I'm not gonna lie, I moved back home about 5 years ago. I'm not leaving. I told my parents,
but the truth is, founders don't get around and bemoan their transactions. Like you personally have, because you've had this big change. You were working 12 hours a day for N years, and this was your focus. So that's a change personally, but...
Yeah, I think, like, I remember for the first several months, like, I'd get up on a Saturday morning, and I'd be, like, it actually, like, I don't know what to do with myself, right? Because you're just, like, I would normally just think about work or go to work or...
Now that's why God invented yoga, right?
Exactly, yeah. Or airplanes.
Airplanes, I was going to say, for this guy. What did you do after the exit took place? Did you go on vacation?
No, I didn't, because, we... Just like you get up and go to work the next day.
Yeah.
But it was a year later that I stepped aside, and so that's when I had my transition. And hated it. Got back to work.
Yeah. No treat yourself kind of moment? No?
Bought a bike.
Bought a bike? How about yourself, Dennis?
Nice one, right? You got a nice bike. Yeah.
Did you buy yourself anything, Dennis?
I did, yeah.
Yeah? there we have it. He bought something. That's why he was acquired by Apple, that that ability to...
Bought a nice new iPad. I would highly recommend it.
Oh, really?
No.
Look at you promoting the company.
Yeah, it's actually, I really do like it. A lot of the stuff I don't, but that's actually pretty good. A couple of friends who had sold their companies in the past had said that it's actually really important to memorialize it in some way. Mm-hmm. And so I bought a fancy car.
Oh, nice. Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's...
I drive a hybrid. A Toyota, in fact. Lisa, you mentioned that you're no longer with the company. Did you know when you were being acquired that was the exit plan? And how did that impact you? You kind of talked about it a little bit.
Yeah. So I stayed on the board and, was a significant shareholder through the end. So the PayPal transaction and the process wasn't a surprise to me. And it was way more fun being an observer rather than in the hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, so it wasn't a surprise. It was just... It was really fun to have a seat at the table without having to be the one sweating through all the details. So if there's any if any of you are going through that sort of, but you probably had that just by virtue of having these seasoned VCs on your cap table right from the beginning. That was something that I didn't have the benefit of growing my business. So to see that quote unquote professionalism in those next steps was incredibly valuable to me.
Great. Explain what happens after the terms are agreed, after the deal is official. So you've kind of like got the thumbs up and you've come to the agreement. What takes place next? I'm sure you both had a different experience, and love to hear a little bit more about that.
So our deal closed January 2nd of 2018, and so I was out of the country over the holidays and dealing with, I remember specifically being at a wedding for a New Year's Eve party and stepping outside and screaming at my lawyer about some minutia at this point. And so then that was December 31st. The 1st is a holiday. The 2nd, all the press kind of goes out, and then just hundreds of messages in LinkedIn. And all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit surreal, and so but honestly, it's just kind of business as usual at that point. You're like, great. Now it's just what's the next thing that we need to kind of go and do? Thinking about transitioning or figuring out what we build, all those types of things. I don't know. It wasn't really. I haven't had that year off yet. It sounds amazing though.
For when you're on the inside of these things, the news comes out. But it's not news to you, obviously, and you're, quite frankly, when you get to that finish line, you're tired. Is the honest truth. And then for me, with quite a large cap table, what I mean is I had lots of little individual investors, friends of my auntie at the Bridge Club who had invested $2,000. So literally, so I had a lot of shareholder communications to do, and again, that was fun. What wasn't so fun was some of the between announcement and close for us. I'm not sure if it was like this for you. For us, in both transactions, it was a relatively long period. And even though, quote unquote, confirmatory diligence has been completed, it's never really completed. So it's like keeping your house perfectly clean.
You sound like my mother.
And no, it's like having an open house every
Yeah.
single day, because they can and they will come in, and they're not really coming in to help. You know what I mean? Like they're really coming in to look for, not to look for, but you don't want them to find bad things.
That sounds very daunting to me. Dennis, how did you break the news to your various stakeholders?
So again, those three stakeholders, I guess, were the investors. So we chatted with them first through this entire process. Then once we got to a certain place, we were like largely comfortable with it. Then the employees, and then the customers found out at the same time as the public did.
I think, like I heard Lisa, and I'm always excited to hear about how employees find out about things. How did your employees find out? Like, was there a check presentation or?
Oh, there's two parts. There's one which was like, there's this opportunity, and do you want to actually go and explore that? And then there's a second part which is like, okay, yeah, there's like whatever, a check presentation, as it were. Some of the early employees I like literally took for coffee and kind of gave them a heads up, and that was pretty emotional, I guess.
Yeah.
And then we sat in a boardroom with a lawyer, and I had them literally handwrite these checks, and I was like, and here you go. And the number of people who cried was, it was a little bit shocking. Yeah.
That's amazing. As most people know here, the acquirers were PayPal and the private equity firm and Apple. One of the things that we don't hear about often is Canadian companies being the acquirers. Why do you think that is? I have my own thoughts on
It's
that.
really simple. It's a matter of valuation. It's just really simple, and we positioned our company, quite intentionally to have U.S. customers and be U.S. focused, and was only ever marketed in the United States.
I think it's a scale. Like, I don't know how many like dev tool companies there are in Canada. So it's like
Very few, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have. We're going to open it up to some Q&A. If you've got a question, we're going to take about 3 to 4 questions. Feel free to raise your hand, and I'll make my way up. So I've got 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start over here.
Great, thanks. Dennis, I have a question for you, and then Lisa, I have a different question for you, if that's okay.
Fell before then.
Sure. Dennis, so you mentioned the employees all had different reactions. I'm just wondering if you would elaborate on if there were any very positive or potentially even negative reactions, and what you would do differently if you were to start another company. And then my question to Lisa is very similar. If you were to, and I think you did start another company, for example, a share structure, you hear about issuing nominal shares and versus like fair market value shares. Like, how would you structure the company to be more favorable to employees? Because you hear a lot that lawyers are very favoring to the company and not to the employees.
Okay, I'll go first. So, yeah, there was some. Most employees were like in the first transaction were. It's just business as usual. And I did do something differently in the second company, and I did grant every employee in my new company has equity, whether they want it or not. And I set up before we did our first round, there was effectively zero value equity on a 5-year reverse vesting schedule, which was done simply to maximize lifetime capital gains opportunity for employees. And that was a lesson I learned in the first one, because some employees, didn't get full benefit or, didn't get full leverage.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. It's one of the things when I think about the early employees of Buddy Build, and I take a look at all those like weekends or late nights or what have you, I found myself there with them. And so I thought about this, and I talked to friends about it. Like, if I were to start another company, would the cap structure or the equity distribution be the same, or would it be different? I think that founders of companies do take presumably a lot more risk, but if someone starts a month or 2 months after you, is it really that much more risk? I mean, there's certain skills that they bring to bear, so that should also kind of carry or weight into the conversation. From day one, Buddy Build, every single employee got equity in the company. I just believe that's like it helped align incentives to be like, we want this to all be successful, and hopefully one day it's worth something. The opportunity for people to be like have a negative reaction to it was like the thumbs up, thumbs down kind of process. And then so a lot of people like were pretty emotional about it. Some people actually just didn't believe you, which is kind of weird. I was like, why would I joke about this? Like, this is done at this point. So it's like, here's your check. And they just like literally were kind of in shock for a while. So yeah, that I guess it was like the most atypical thing. I was like, no, like these are real lawyers. This is an actual check. I don't know what you want me to do. Like, so yeah, that's how that worked. Honestly, it's one of the things that I was talking to someone just before this. I think a lot of employees, I think it's atypical relative to the U.S., but a lot of employees in Canada don't realize how equity works, right? Like they don't, like I had to explain it repeatedly to employees to be like, here's, what a cap table is, here's what your share price looks like, here's how, like, it just wasn't even part of the vernacular. And I was like, no, this is how you get hopefully paid one day, right? So I think that's actually a really healthy thing. I think that like, I think about those employees and I think about their contributions, and they should be recognized and rewarded. And so, yeah.
Great. There was a question over here, but I didn't know. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Kevin.
Hi, guys. Thanks for doing this. Lisa, my question's for you. It's kind of two parts. What was the first sale like for you personally, selling to a PE firm? And second, what was the experience like after being one of the founders, but having to answer and work with a majority shareholder?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And for me, it wasn't a bed of roses. And it was a really interesting, again, it had been 14 years. And so when you're going into a transaction, you absolutely have to, if you want to leave the door open for a financial buyer, you actually have to have the management team is 100% committed. We want to keep going. Of course, we're the management team that wants to prevail. And all of the buyers say, we love your management team. We love you as a CEO. You're the team we want to back. But the truth was that I was ambivalent about whether or not I wanted to really continue. And the truth was the buyer was really ambivalent about whether they thought I was the right CEO. And so in quite short order, the dynamic of having truly a boss, right, who are these young MBAs, young Wharton MBAs, it wasn't always it wasn't fun. Quite honestly, it wasn't fun. But they were really great people, really nice, great people, loved working with them, just didn't like having them as a boss. And what actually happened was they decided they wanted to recruit a new CEO. I, on paper, and they told me this, and were delighted to have me be part of the process and wanted me to continue and all this great stuff, right, just not as CEO. I wanted that outcome. I wanted to step aside. I said I'd been doing it for a long time. That was always my plan. Yet, it really sucked to have somebody else say that they agreed with me somebody else should be the CEO. So that's the honest truth. It wasn't a bed of roses, but they were good people, worked through it. I stepped aside, and I worked through the process, recruited a great guy, had a great relationship, all the rest of that. So it worked out, but it's an absolute different dynamic between really running your own show and really having, majority control bosses.
Thank you. Julian has our last question for the evening. Julian, make it a good one, no pressure.
This one is for Lisa. Since you've been in the fintech space for quite a long time, I'm very curious what your opinion is on decentralized finance applications like blockchains and Ethereum are, and how you think that's going to play a role in fintech in the future.
A little off topic, don't you think?
A little bit.
Yeah, maybe we'll pick that up offline. I hate the blockchain. When Ripple started, I wanted Hyperwallet to be a node on the blockchain, thought it was the greatest thing, downloaded Ethereum, built an Ethereum app myself. But I hate it because people think they're building real companies because they understand distributed databases or open cryptocurrencies, and it'd be like me saying that I'm a database company because I downloaded and installed Oracle. That's my personal view.
Poor Larry. Thank you for laughing at that one. Any other questions? Since poor Julian asked a terrible one. I'm just fucking you, Julian. I'm just teasing. It's a personal one-on-one question. You'll get some time. Pardon? Oh, challenge accepted.
Hey, Pindy, I think that gentleman has a question.
Dave, I know. I see him. I was coming, my friend.
So guys, that was really good. In fact, I just have to say, hearing you talk about this, less about the money, more about the alignment, is super inspiring. So there's this guy named Basil Peters. Do you know him? So he talks a lot about early exits, and his argument is that most entrepreneurs hold on too long. Do you guys have a view about that? Are you as concerned to advise founders like me and many others here to be ready to exit early rather than holding on for dear life?
I think probably one of the key takeaways is we had very different experiences over very different timelines. I think it's a very personal decision, right? And it's I think being prescriptive around when you should exit a company is that just seems super random to me. How do you know what the nuances are, right? You could be I'm just mentally spent and I don't want to do this anymore, right? And there's someone who wants to pay me a ton of money for it. I don't know, why wouldn't you exit that company? Now that happens a year in or 10 years in, there's so many different factors. So I don't know. It seems probably a little heavy-handed to be so prescriptive.
Yeah, I don't agree with him that most founders hang on too long. I don't know what the data says, but most founders, if they have the opportunity and have an offer that and there is an opportunity for liquidity and they can rationally assess it, I would think that most founders would make rational decisions. So I do not think that there is this mentality in a founder that there's always a better deal, that my company is always the best. I think that if you've been in a business for any length of time, you're well aware of timing and the various routes forward. So no, don't buy it.
I think it's kind of like life in general, right? There used to be this idea of you have to finish school, then you have to get married, and all these kind of timelines and expectations, and they don't really exist. And I think the same is true for a company. It's going to happen when it's supposed to happen. Maybe. No?
Yeah, everything has
That was
a
my
beginning
analogy.
and
That
an
was
end.
prolific. My mom would be so proud. But I just wanted to say first, before we kind of jump to this stuff, thank you so much. This has been super wonderful. I just love that, as Dave kind of mentioned, there's a lot of talk about values and alignment, about what you want to build. And that's so refreshing to hear, because so much you hear and read about is pricing, right? It was the right amount for us, and it's not actually the story. So I learned personally a lot from today's talk, not having gone through an acquisition. So just a round of applause for both Lisa and Dennis.